Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Transportation Committee meeting of Wednesday, November 8th, 2017. Councilmember Bonin, the chair. I'm going to start. Any item I approve by myself will be sent to the council as a report from the chair. Once one of my colleagues arrives, we'll take up the other items. Mr. Herman, I'm giving you your first warning, first and only. Let us begin with, I'll do public comment. And Mr. Herman, you have 2 minutes on the items and a minute of general.
General public comment first. So you see, last evening as I participated in Van Nuys during the community event of Nuri Martinez, we were talking about the traffic jams up there, dealing with trafficking children. And you know that a lot of children get fucked in the backseat of a car because of trafficking. And some children even get fucked while traveling in public transportation. Because according to what the announcement says, if there's harassment or kind of window sexual advancements in a train, bus, car, or police car, you should be aware that you could be in a very bad situation. And now let me go into the item C. You see, Jose Huizar is a part of this committee here on Transportation Authority Federal Earmark Repurposing Funding Swap. Well, I don't want that refunding swap to be swapped because that's like him swapping Francine Godoy for $185,000. Then I go into item number 10, Jose Huizar and Bonin, Main and Spring, Forward Improvement Project related to matters. Well, related matters deal with Willits versus Los Angeles. How the fuck do you expect people to commute if you got barriers that impair access and programmatic access for disabled and the elderly, and specifically to the non-disabled peers who wish to go forward on improvement projects? Now, I'm not one to say who's patting whose wallet or who's taking the drugs and fucking up, but I sure know of one road diet who's on a recall. And then on my last closing item, item number 1, Miss Sheila Tejeda, we don't know who the fuck she is. For all I know, she might have teen porn.
So, as is customary, let me make my customary announcement at this meeting. For those of you who are new to this committee or to public hearings in the city of Los Angeles, due to the well-intentioned and constitutionally necessary provisions of the Brown Act and protections of the First Amendment, we sometimes have to endure really offensive comments at this committee and in council, and our apologies to those in the audience. We're as frustrated with the situation as anybody. All right, let me take up item number 7 at this time.
Item number 7 is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to amending the municipal code, which prohibits the parking of vehicles displaying for sale signs.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, members. My name is Cairo Rodriguez. I work for Council President Herb Weston's office. First thing I want to say, there's an error on the motion. We would like to get an amendment on item 17-0858. It has the wrong directions on the streets.
Okay.
Can we give this to the clerk?
If it's not changing the streets or the blocks and merely just the direction of it.
Just the east and west.
That's technical correction. That's okay, right?
Is it are the exact same locations.
It's the same location.
It's just the,
It's
I believe
the,
we've already transmitted the actual ordinance too on this.
Right.
So is it incorrect in the ordinance, or is it just?
Yes, incorrect on the motion.
Just in the motion?
Yeah.
Oh, it's okay, then we're going to have to modify, go back and transmit a new ordinance.
So do a new motion? Or
Well,
The only thing that's pending before the committee right now is the ordinance. So if the ordinance is incorrect, we don't have a motion here.
Okay.
So it's the ordinance that's incorrect, is that right?
is the motion that's incorrect? It's just the name of the street. Instead of saying, it should be east of Airolo instead of west of Airolo.
So, Mr. City Attorney, as a committee, we don't have the option of just asking that the ordinance, by the time we get to council, just change the words east and west?
the only concern is if there were people that were east of that who would have shown up possibly to have the matter, when the matter was heard at public comment.
Except it has the borders of the street.
yeah,
The borders haven't changed.
can I make a comment? Basically, what happened is, it should read the east side of Airolo rather than the west side, because the west side already has a red zone. There's no parking there, period. So the east side of Airolo is actually where it's being affected, just on that block.
Just on that
Not
block.
necessarily east side, it's just the east curb, I would say.
Oh, okay.
rather-
It wouldn't have. So just a technical correction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think we
Okay. What sort of testimony do you, because we need to make the findings, you need to hear from LAPD?
we can hear from LAPD as the problems that.
You need to define the problem as part of the public hearing.
So basically, that area has the senior center right on the corner of Norm Indian Airolo, and also on the other side of the street, on the west side of Airolo, which already has the red zone, has Seoul International Park. So there's very limited parking for both the senior center and also for the park. The park is limited to, I believe there's about 8 staff parking and about 8 additional parking for the whole park. And then the senior center, I believe there's about 12 parking spaces. So everybody else who goes to the senior center or the park has to park on the street. Unfortunately, that neighborhood, the north side and the east side is claimed by Mara Salvatrucha. The south side is Mara Salvatrucha is a big gang, in the local gang. On the south side, we have Playboys, Hispanic Playboys. On the other side, on the west side, we have Hobart Street Thugs, and Atlan is another gang. On the other side, southwest side, we have Mid-City Stoners. So for the patrons to the park and also for the seniors, we would prefer that they park close to where they needed to go rather than parking blocks away and having to traverse those type of areas to
Right.
get to the park.
And under the current situation, all that parking is being taken by people with for sale signs,
Yes.
and you've observed that yourself?
Yes, on weekends and then on certain days. It's not 24 hours a day, obviously. They move the cars during street cleaning days and stuff like that.
But otherwise, they're there all the time?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You have testimony sufficient to make the findings? All right, so unless there's an objection, the recommendation from this committee would be to approve with the technical amendments as presented by CD10. Any objection?
No objection.
Okay, that is approved. I will, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Approved. I'll note for the record that I'm joined by Mr. Koretz and Ms. Martinez, and I'll wait a second for Ms. Martinez to get settled before I suggest some items for consent. While I'm doing that, let me just announce that I have a new transportation policy director, Mr. Eric Bruins, who is sitting here.
Oh, I know Eric.
Paul Backstrom has moved over to Metro. I've traded one tall, thin cyclist with a beard for one without a beard. So welcome and thank you for being part of the staff, Eric. So colleagues, for consent, I was going to recommend items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, and 11. Anybody?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 11.
Yeah.
Works for me.
That's fine.
All right. Okay, so those items are approved on consent, and we've already approved item number 7. So that brings us to item number 1.
Item number 1 is a communication from the mayor and the City Ethics Commission report relative to the appointment of Ms. Sheila Tejada to the Board of Transportation Commissioners for the term ending June 30th, 2019.
Come on up. Yeah. Welcome.
Hello, I'm
Hello.
Sheila Tejada, and I've been recommended by the mayor to join the Transportation Commission.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what your interest or intersection is with transportation policy?
Oh, yes, it's a very exciting time right now, I think, for transportation, and also my background, I'm a professor in computer science at USC and in artificial intelligence, and I work with robotics, and yes, last year I was on a panel for the county on autonomous cars, right? So we have our self-driving cars, but computer science, artificial intelligence, and transportation, I mean, I use Google Maps to get here, Lyft, all of those things.
Yeah.
It definitely is tied together. Right? We use a lot of artificial intelligence right now to do planning, transportation. So it's an exciting time.
It certainly is, and it's a perfect time to have your skill set as part of the Transportation Committee. Why did you want to serve on a commission in the first place?
Well, one is, I think, wow, it's so fitting that it's today, it's the anniversary. I just feel that it's time and for more scientists to be able to give back.
Women scientists.
And more women scientists to also give back and to be of service to the city.
Excellent. And which council district do you live in?
Councilman Ryu?
Okay,
Right.
yeah. All right, cool. Colleagues, any questions? No? All right, well, we will unanimously recommend your approval. Schedule this, is there a date yet for council?
Probably going to be the 22nd, I believe.
Okay, all right. Great, okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was relatively painless, right? Okay, that brings us to item number 9.
Item number 9 is a DOT report relative to the formulation of a multi-provider car share fixed base and point-to-point car share permit program.
Okay, before staff comes up, we have one public comment card on this. Anthony Fernandez from Zipcar. Would you like to come on up and testify? What's your opinion?
Hello, Mr. Chair and committee members. Just wanted to be brief. On behalf of Zipcar, we thank you for taking into our consideration the issues that we had with the previous ordinance. And we do believe that there are some issues that need to be resolved still, but we look forward to working with you and DOT. So thank you again.
Thank you. Oh, well, before you go, what are some of the issues that need to be resolved?
Specifically with the fees and the data that that DOT is requesting. We spoke this morning with Mr. Bruins, and we've outlined all of that. But the fees in general are, LA would be the highest fees throughout the country for car sharing, and being that car sharing is still relatively new to the city and to the residents, it would be a burden for us to use city spaces.
So are you saying we should approve this and work out some issues, or are you saying we need to put this back in the oven and bake it a little bit longer?
I would say if we could continue it, ideally, we'd like to be a little bit more involved with Mr. Bruins and work through all the issues.
All right. Okay, let me bring up staff and have them report on the item, and we'll have a discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Marcel Porras, Chief Sustainability Officer, LADOT.
Anita Tang, Management Analyst, LADOT.
And Jay Kim,
LADOT.
Good afternoon. So, council members, today's report is a follow-up to the May Transportation Committee, where we presented you with a car share permitting pilot program covering both fixed space and point-to-point car sharing, also referred to as free-floating. At that meeting, we heard from the committee that they wanted additional information on the following items. One was on outreach protocol. Two was they wanted us to solicit additional feedback from the industry, which we did. Discussion about an equity program. Provisions to prevent over-concentration of car sharing locations, and in particular, some consideration for the coastal areas as well. Also, there was, in relation to the free-floating program, there was a question regarding access to PPDs, preferential parking districts. And then there was also a request for discussion around development of a master permit as well. So, so we did solicit feedback from the industry. We received feedback from 5 different companies, and the feedback ranged from the question around fees to also reporting on data and some other specifics around rules and guidelines. And so we took that feedback, and I think the first thing that we started to do was really take a look at the fees that we had established, and an internal policy discussion within the department about how can we encourage the expansion of a pilot within the city of Los Angeles. So with that, we actually were able to take a haircut on some of the fees that we do charge. Initially, the permit fee per vehicle was $500, and we reduced that fee to $250, so we cut that in half. Also, the other sets of fees were related to conversion of the metered space. And so in some instances, some of the things that factor in are parking meter, removal of the parking meter head, coloring the curb, laying down, fabricating signs. And so overall, we were able to reduce that amount by, I believe, was it 400? And we also were able to give an option to the car sharing company, if they so decided to do some of the work on their own, as long as it was inspected and approved by our operations, our field ops teams. And so we ultimately were able to bring down the costs in response to some of the concerns that were expressed by the car sharing companies. Additionally, some of the questions that arose here were around what the outreach protocol is, and so we worked with your staff council member, and then also working with the CLA to actually look at how we can better articulate in the rules and guidelines the outreach protocol. And so what we landed on was that the qualified car sharing operator would be required to conduct outreach to businesses and community stakeholders, with final approval being dependent on the council office. And so this would ensure that there was local input given by not just by the business and the community stakeholders, but also by the council office of final approval. So we felt that, one, that ensured that there was good feedback, and we were ensuring that we were looking at successful locations. And two, I think this approach also leads to preventing from the over-concentration issue. In addition, one of the policies that we put into the rules and guidelines was to actually limit the number of actual...
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Mr. Herman, please leave the room. Please leave the room for disrupting the meeting. For disrupting the meeting. Please leave the room.
I'm disrupting the meeting.
Please leave the room.
42 U.S.C. 121.01.
You're continuing to disrupt the meeting.
And just for the record, he was also snorting earlier, making animal noises.
How the fuck can I snort when I'm hurt, you fat fuck?
Not at the same time.
Fat fucking pig. This is what a pig sounds like. That's pig noises like you fat fuck, Jew.
For the record, Mr. Herman continued to disrupt the meeting as he left the room.
Fuck you. 42 U.S.C. 121.01, bitch.
Please continue.
Yes. Another thing we did to ensure that we were not over-concentrating in a neighborhood was that we limit the amount of car sharing locations per block. So there would only be 2 spaces available per block. And And then lastly, the other thing that we reserve the right to in the rules and regulations is to deny a permit for any reason. So we felt that that addressed it. In regard to the coastal access specifically, in the rules and regulations, we clearly specify that any, aside from the other levers that we discussed, was that they would be required to submit to any type of permitting that is required by the Coastal Commission as well. The other question that arose regarding access to preferential parking districts, and so we went back in this report, we actually presenting an actual specific pilot area for the free floating system, and so that area is approximately 1,600 square miles. And that generally is on the eastern side is bounded by downtown Los Angeles, on the southern side by USC and across the 10, west bounded by Fairfax, I believe, and then north to Hollywood. And so that is the initial pilot area. So with that pilot area being defined, we then tasked the interested free-floating car-sharing company to actually go and sit down with all of the affected council offices to get sign-off on whether or not they would support this system being allowed to park within the PPD areas. And then DOT followed up and verified that they had gotten support and sign-off from those council districts. Lastly, this committee directed LADOT to go back and give some thought in terms of what an equity program could look like. So we did some research, both nationally, looking at some different programs, and I think generally the way the different buckets that we saw for specific equity programs included the following three. One, specifically looking at community outreach and education. Two, providing car sharing subsidies for both rates and membership fees. And third, looking at partnership programs with community-based organizations and businesses. I think at this time, putting any more meat on a program without action would be speculative at this point, because we don't know ultimately where the car sharing companies are actually going to want to go outside of the free floating, for example. We don't know, without the access to data in terms of the utilization of the system, what type of equity of these three equity programs would be successful. So I think, one of the things that we were proposing is to actually just on the mechanics of the fees and how those fees could be deposited for potential use in the future. So one of the fees that is collected from both the fixed space and from the free floating is meter recovery revenue, meter recovery fees. And so in this instance, we're actually proposing that those fees that are collected not go back to SPRF, but be deposited in the same sub-account that the car sharing program would go. And so that money can start accumulating, and pending further policy discussion at this committee and direction from the council based on a report that we would bring back based on the findings we find from where car sharing companies want to go, where they want to locate, we would come back to this committee to look for policy guidance on specifically the equity program and expenditure of those funds. Sorry if that was confusing.
Anything else before I get into some questions?
No, that's all.
Okay, so the report attached to the council file is not the current report? You've revised it since last week?
Looks like it.
So the recommendations, right,
Yeah.
about the report.
The attachment A.
Oh, yes, the rules and guidelines, yes.
So how have they changed from what members might have seen last night when they were reading their materials from their staffs?
Sure.
Do you have a copy?
We do have a markout. We provided
Copies for everyone?
we provided markout copies to the chair and to the clerk, and we have other copies that aren't marked up.
I don't think you can ask the committee members to approve something that they haven't seen.
Sure.
So you haven't seen them either?
I just saw it a short while ago. Let me ask a couple questions, and then we can, I think we may need to continue this so folks can have an opportunity to look through the changes. First of all, the attachment, the revised one that I saw, it's a little bit hard to make out some of the rules because it's not specifically broken out between the fixed and the point-to-point. I think it might benefit from having a separate section that says this is what applies to all, this is what applies to point-to-point, this is what applies to fixed. Also, it's a little unclear when you say permit if you're referring to the master permit or if you're referring to the individual permit. So if there could be a way to break that out and distinguish that, I think that would be helpful. That's just some sort of basic clarity and wordsmithing stuff. Beyond that, I would like to see, I'm concerned, we're sort of trying to reach a balancing act on the fees, right? We want to have enough money to be able to fund some equity programming, but we also don't want to have the fees so high that we don't have car share in Los Angeles. And I appreciate that you guys said you've taken a haircut, but what I'd like to see is a matrix that says this is what the fee structure is in San Francisco, this is what the fee structure is in Seattle or wherever, this is what it is in Los Angeles, and if we're assessing fees that the others don't, I'd like to know, what's our rationale for it. If our fees are different, why is it lower, why is it higher, so we can sort of drill down on the numbers. I think that's going to be pretty important for us to do. And I do want to say right now that I think you will have some issues with the Budget and Finance Committee, certainly the Budget and Finance Chair, if you're talking about not replacing the money that would go to the SPRF and putting it somewhere else. You're opening up a can of worms on that one.
Huge.
Yeah. And then on the locations in the coastal zone, I appreciate you've given some thought to that. And for my colleagues who aren't familiar with the peculiarities of life in the coastal zone, almost anything that happens in the coastal zone, which in Venice is west of Lincoln, is subject to some approval by the Coastal Commission. It requires a coastal development permit, and things as small as a bus shelter require a coastal development permit. A curfew on the beaches requires a coastal development permit. So we don't yet have clarity yet on whether or not the Coastal Commission is going to require a coastal development permit, and I think we might want to do some due diligence and find out if they're going to. I'm concerned that if we're putting the onus on the company to go through the coastal development permit process, we're essentially precluding the coastal zone, because an individual coastal development permit is, you have to go through a city process, Board of Public Works has to approve it, then you have to go to the Coastal Commission, they have to approve it. It could take up to a year, by which point you're halfway through the pilot program. It might make sense, depending on the Coastal Commission's perspective, for the city to apply for the master permit for the coastal zone, for the ability to issue permits within the coastal zone, so that then whoever is selected as the operator has the ability to do it. Because otherwise, I think it's too steep a disincentive. And then I did have a question on some of the data you're asking for on origin and destination, and this, I think, more than anything, is one of the reasons why I think the attachment and the rules and regulations would benefit from being split out with the different rules for the two different types of systems. Because it's a fundamentally different operating model, it's a fundamentally different business model. If you're operating a fixed system, you're not collecting origin and destination because they're starting and ending at that fixed station. Makes total sense for the floating, but less intuitive for the other system. So those are just my thoughts. Ms. Martinez?
Okay, so what is your intent to keep this item in committee until?
Yeah, and ask them to come back with a revised report.
Okay, great. So my questions were more about the point-to-point car sharing. And so how would you monitor whether there is an overconcentration of vehicles in a particular area? I understand you just said you would limit the locations to 2 cars per block, but how do you intend to monitor that?
Jacob from DOT. There's actually a provision in the rules and regulations. They're actually
The new rules and regulations?
Yes.
Your new version?
Yes,
Okay.
in the both versions. But they're actually supposed to supply us with the ability to monitor in real time, and so we will know.
So you're going to have
Yes.
the digital ability to
Yes.
monitor in real time? Okay.
So that will be our way to make sure that we don't have overconcentration in a particular area.
And if a neighbor notices a car that's been on the street for too long, what are the avenues that we're providing the residents to be able to file a formal complaint?
The vehicles will actually have phone numbers on them, so you can contact the company.
Is there going to be a live person who answers the
Yes,
phone?
they're required to provide.
And how long do they does the company have?
24/7, 365.
But how long do they have to respond and get that vehicle moved from the area? Once a formal complaint is made and it's found that it's justified?
I think, again, some of these things, it's something that we'll have to iron out as part of the application process. And we don't have every single.
I just don't want complaints in my
Yeah,
office.
and I think
I know
the important thing
planning
is.
anywhere near me, but you
Yeah.
know what I mean.
Yep.
I
For
was
us to
thinking maybe
actually,
for other council members, unless you want to field calls about this, but I'm certainly not.
No, I'm probably the one who will get the most of it.
I was just looking at you, Mr. Koretz, for some reason.
You and David.
as part of the application process, that is really our intent, is to
Okay.
build in these mechanisms where if there is a public complaint, there is ability for us as a city and working with the operator, working in tandem with our enforcement officers to work together to make sure that it's addressed very quickly in a responsive way while it doesn't hurt the business, right? Because we don't want to come in and just tow the cars away, for example. We want to make sure that those cars are.
But we want
put back-
somebody on the other side
Yes.
to be responsive.
Yes,
and
we do
and
want that,
get it-
but we also
get
want
the
to be
cars
responsive
moved.
to the business
The other
community.
question I have, if a car enters an area that's not within the pilot area, how will the user be notified, or how will the information that they need to leave that particular area that's outside of the
I
pilot?
believe
be
generally, the cars kind of have a geofenced area, and if they're trying to park outside of that particular
Yeah.
area, there are mechanisms typically that communicate to the
And what are those
customer.
mechanisms? Can you be more specific?
Sure. So you have to use your phone to begin and end a ride. You actually will not be able to end your ride
Because
because
you're not in the designated.
you're not in a designated area. That's also important to note that that geofence will apply at all times on streets that have peak hour travel restrictions, because we don't want someone parking in at noon and it stays there till 5 p.m. where the lane switches. So rather to avoid that, we would require a geofence on all of our peak hour as well as everything outside of the area as well.
And then the last question, Mr. Chair, is how many vehicles do you expect to be part of this pilot? Do we have a fleet size, or what are you thinking? How many cars?
Preliminary conversations have been for the free floating to be approximately 300 vehicles
Per area? Or the
for
entire thing?
for the
Oh,
pilot area. Yeah.
Okay, that's all, thanks.
Before I turn it over to Mr. Koretz, the peak hour restrictions, appreciate that's in there, but it raises a couple questions for me. We have the same provision for posted street sweeping? Okay. And what about something with
I'm sorry, for posted
street sweeping?
For posted street sweeping, so the free floating will be required to adhere to all of the rules and regulations of posted parking signs.
Okay. And what happens if, and this would apply for either the permitted or the free floating, what happens if there's a film shoot and parking is temporarily eliminated on a street or a block?
So I think that
Given the problems we've had with the film industry and the bike lanes and the color green, I don't want us to get into a protracted thing here. I'd like us to figure this out before.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely, we would have to have communication between the film industry and the car sharing company so that we're in as much as real time as possible, being able to share that information with the qualified car sharing operator.
So we probably need something in the rules that say that, where you're prohibited from parking, not just for the permanent postings like peak hours and posted street sweeping, but for temporary things like film shoots and stuff.
Have you reached out to them,
To the film industry?
to the film industry?
No.
I want to, just because we already have a bad rap with those green.
Yep.
The green paint, remember the debate over the green paint?
I'm still living the green paint debate.
I believe we covered that issue in the rules where we're supposed to work with our operator to let them know if we know of an event where they're going to be taken out of service temporarily, then we'll work with them to make sure that they either get a different location nearby or that, they would have to kind of take the car out of commission, for that duration. But there is a mechanism to deal with those issues.
Because we all make mistakes, if something happens and they're not notified and their vehicle gets towed, who pays?
The qualified car sharing company.
No, I mean, if it was our
Yeah.
fault because we didn't notify properly, then obviously we would honor that and make sure that they don't get dinged for, our mistake. And I think, again, those are some of the things that we want to make sure that, we address as we work things out with the operators. And that will be part of the whole application process.
Sure. Okay. Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you clarify exactly how the fee structure works? Are we just billing them for the use of a particular meter as a regular resting space? Do we have other fees? And what's the actual billing again for the meter space itself?
Sure. So as a reminder, there's two programs being proposed. The one is fixed space. And so in that instance, the car sharing company would work with the department to convert that fixed on-street space to full-time use only for the car share company, right? So in that model, the city will charge a permitting fee of $250 per vehicle.
Is that per month or per year?
Per year. And it will charge a meter recovery fee.
If there is a meter.
If there's a meter, no, actually, even if there isn't a meter. So we have 3 tiers, and so there's a monthly fee of $75 for what we call zone 1. So that's any meter that generates less than $1,000, and so if it's any space. So even if it's not a metered space, they would need to pay $75 a month. That goes up to the next zone, which is $175 monthly fee, and that is for spaces that generate between $1,000 and $2,000. And then the highest zone is zone 3, and that's a $275 monthly fee, and that's for spaces that generate between $2,000 and $3,600. We are not providing the opportunity for them to convert a space that makes over $3,600. And then, so those are that's the permit and the meter recovery fee. On top of that, there is a one-time fee for the conversion of the space. And that addresses...
What's that one-time fee?
It ranges between $430 and, was it $1,000?
No, it's $630 to... the difference would be $630 or $300. If the operator decided to do the conversion themselves, then they pay the $200 for the meter removal and also $100 for the engineering inspection. And if they choose to have city to do the conversion for them, then it would be an additional $430, but they don't have to pay for the inspection.
Okay, and And what about permit parking districts? How do we keep from these becoming problematic? Certainly, I'm going to hear from it from some of my permit parking areas that are incredibly densely populated already. So how do we make sure that a handful of cars don't make it almost impossible for anyone to ever find a space?
So for the, I think it's working closely with the car share operator. I think one of the conversations that we've had, particularly in the early phases of the pilot, is really having quick response time to any complaints that comes for cars that have been sitting in a neighborhood. I think the idea, if those cars are parked in a PPD, it's because someone was going theoretically to that PPD. And so this model relies on kind of a self-rebalancing, and so that location would then ideally be picked up by another user and taken out of the PPD. I think as we monitor, and if there ends up being complaints or issues with an overconcentration, that's where we would work with the car sharing company to adjust that.
Now, are people allowed to drive to an area and park for a couple hours and then drive the same car back to where they came from?
Yes, as long as it's available.
So somebody else could grab it in the interim?
Yes.
And how do they use the keys? What's the technology to allow people to pick up cars?
You know, I might invite, I don't know if, can you talk about the technology? We have a gentleman from Car2Go here who can actually talk a little bit more in detail about the technology.
I presume it's not reliant just on people's keys because they keep the key for a couple hours and you wouldn't have the ability for someone else to grab it.
Hello. I'm David Holzer, Regional Director for Car2Go. Thank you very much for having me here. Let me explain sort of how the system works. So it's all cell phone operated. So you start the rental with your cell phone by pressing a button in an app, and then the doors unlock. And inside the car is the key for the car. It's usually in the glove box, or it could be somewhere else. You open up the glove box, you pull the key out, you start the car. Once you're driving the car, you can drive it to any location that we have legal parking, and we tell our members that they have to park legally within the zones that are permitted. So then once they park and they want to end their rental, they put the key back in the holder, they close up the car, and they end their rental on the app. So it's really quite simple. Let's say somebody sees the key in the car, thinks that they can drive it. They can't because the car has security features that don't allow it to start without a rental being processed. So, I mean, yeah, I hope that clarifies it. Yeah, I mean, what we see is most people reserve the car for a little bit so they know it's there, and they walk to it, grab the car, and then they're off. And they take relatively quick trips around the city.
But I could check one out in the zone, pilot zone, go to dinner in CD6 with Ms. Martinez, park there outside the zone, and then bring it back into the zone later.
Sure, yeah.
And end the trip there.
For sure. I mean, at that point, you're still paying for the rental time.
Yeah.
And you pay for the rental time until you get it back into the home zone.
Yeah.
And until you want to end the trip. So.
And just to clarify, I want to make sure everybody understands this. While I am in Ms. Martinez's district, I am not allowed to be exempted from any parking regulations at all. Right. Have to obey everything.
That's it for me.
Okay, so I don't want this to linger from May to October, that kind of length of time. Given the questions I asked, the revisions I asked for, how long do you think it'll take you?
January.
Oh, okay, that much, okay. All right.
I mean, if if you think that there's room for the December agenda, we can start working on this.
Well, December might be tough, but
We'll work to prepare it for the December agenda.
okay, yeah.
And if there's room for it, and if we don't run into any other
Yeah.
issues, then we'll endeavor for the December
Okay,
agenda meeting.
good. Awesome, okay. Thank you. And that's it, right? All right, so everything else has been approved, and that clears the desk. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.